Okay, so we're going to kind of review a solution for the case study, chapter 9, which is labeled Updating Incidents. So we're just going to go through this and kind of look at a code solution to do this. So for this assignment, you'll add some pages that let technicians view all of their assigned and open incidents. Then the technician can edit an incident's description and specify a close date. So kind of the first mock-up here, you see that we've got a tech incident controller, and so that's new. And then once you select in this particular controller, tech incident, all you really have is a list of technicians. And then once you select your technician, it changes it to the list action and the ID. I believe that's a technician ID that goes up there. So let's look at the specifications. The Get Technician page is only displayed by the Update Incident link on the home page for the website. There is no link for it in the nav bar. And so if I boot this up, here's your home page. Here's a link. You can see down in the lower left-hand corner, it's going to take you to /tech incident. Okay, so that's the first requirement. It's just a homepage link. The Get Technician page allows a user to select the technician name. If the user doesn't select the name, the app should display a message indicating the user must select a technician. So a little data validation there. So let's test that. So here, you must select a technician. If you don't select, if I select Gunter, you can see here's one open incident under Gunter. If I go back, let me select another one. You can see this technician ID is 11 for Allison Diaz, Andrew, so on and so forth. And so we've got tech incident controller, list action, and then the IDs coming across as 13. I think the only one that currently has one that's open is Gunter. The incidents by technician page displays all open incidents that have been assigned to the selected technician, or if there's no incidents for the current technician, this page displays a message that indicates there are no open incidents. So again, here's one open incident for Gunter. If I go back here, selected technician has no opened incidents. To switch technicians, the user can click on the Switch Technician button. This displays the Get Technician page, as I just demonstrated. If I click on Edit Incident under Gunter, so let's select Gunter, select, Edit. So now we're in Edit Incident, and basically said you can give it a date closed. This is a text box. And you can update the description. So you can fill in these two fields.
Now there's no incidents?
Now there's no, yeah. So we need to fix that. And since I closed that, let's go into our database and reopen it. Whoops. I just dragged my OBS around. There you go. Fix that. Okay, to reopen it, let's dig into our database. Sports Pro, tables, incidents. Technician ID was 14. And let's delete that. See if we can just enter null and save. It's not gonna like that. Change has not been view data. Okay. So that was technician ID 14. Date close is not there. I didn't change the description, so I just changed the date close back to null. And let's see now if I close that and relaunch, if that does the job of reopening. There it goes. Okay, so where to start? Well, spot number one is to create a view model and a controller tech incident. So under models, you can see I have a subfolder here for view models, not necessary. Here's a tech incident view model. So here's my view model. So we'll come back to this. And also under controllers, tech incident controller. Then finally, inside of views, here's a tech incident and an index. So we introduced view models in chapter 8 maybe, and the idea is that it's a typed entity, right, that kind of gives you a little bit more IntelliSense versus using ViewBag to kind of load everything in. And so I think of a view model as kind of a join, and you know, you can pull out different pieces of information out of the database and load it into a view model, and then pass that view model into the view. Instead of using both a model and a view bag, you could just use one view model. And so this view model ultimately will work with a single technician, single incident, and essentially a list of incidents. And that's kind of where now this view model, you know, just kind of jumping ahead a little bit, or jumping around, I guess you would say. If I look at my edit here, on my edit view, we end up using this tech incident view model, right? So when we go to edit, that's where we'll use the view model. But if I just go to my default index, we're not using that model. We're just using a regular technician. And we'll see what that is. Obviously, we're just using information in that drop-down list from your technicians. So you don't really need the tech incident view model, although it could be coded that way. That's not the route taken here. And then list also uses tech incident view model. And so kind of back up here, we start with the view model. The view model has a technician, an incident, and a list of incidents. And we'll use that as we build this out. So once we have this view model coded up, it makes sense to get into the controller next. This tech incident controller will allow us to have the /tech incident in our route, right? So essentially here is bringing us to /index is kind of implied for our action method. And so, yeah, Vinny.
Can you explain the line number 9 tech key?
Yeah, I will in just a minute. You're, well, so tech key is, you can kind of see line 9. What is line 9? It's a constant that allows us to reuse this variable in our session. And so instead of hard coding tech key here, or tech ID, because oftentimes you'd have to code it once, you'd have to code it again twice, 3 times. So instead of coding that string 3 or 4 times, you declare it as a constant once and then just reuse it.
Gotcha.
Right? That's all that is. Right? So line 9 just makes it constant for us to reuse throughout our code. So that's line 9. We open up a connection to the database, right, using some entity framework. And so we make this variable called context. And then we use this, dependency injection to kind of send in that context into this class. And so basically allows line 11 allows us to create this variable that we can run some link queries against and hit some data against the database. So now by creating this controller and ultimately by creating the index view for a tech incident, we're getting to the point where we can hit the database, send that information to the view, and get our drop-down list. And so in this drop-down list, what do we need? Well, we need a list of technicians. So that's essentially on the get request. So on line 14, when you call this index method for the page for the first time, it's a get request, and we're loading some technicians into a view bag, right, from the database, context technicians, basically where technician ID is greater than -1. Basically all the technicians have IDs that are greater than -1, so it's kind of like a select star. Ordering the technicians by their name, and so alphabetical, right? A comes before G, comes before J, right? So we have a sort going on here, and converting that to a list and storing that inside of a bag that you're going to send to the view, aka the view bag. Dot technicians. Now, quite honestly, this part here where we're calling some session state variables and things like that, you could leave that out for now, because this is I don't believe in the requirements of this assignment unless I'm overlooking it, at least at this point, right? So
it'll come into play later, I think.
It does later. Oh, there it is. The website should store the technician's ID in session state. That way the website can remember the current technician. So for that, right? So here's that requirement. So here, line 22 spins up a new technician object. We try to read from the session variable get int32. So by the string of tech key, which is your tech ID. Basically, this returns an int or not, right? Because it's nullable. So if you have written to session state, that'll return the ID. Otherwise, it doesn't. And then this performs a lookup, right? The technician object, and here we're doing a find by the tech ID if the tech ID has a value. So if it's not null, then look up that technician ID. And this is all while the page is loading. Remember that, right? And then send that technician to the view. So let's just put a breakpoint in. And let me close this down. And just kind of trace through this and follow it. Update incidents. Okay, so fires the index method on the get request. And let me see if I can step out of that. Step over. Okay, so you could see just by hovering over view bag technicians, this hits our database and returns our 5 technicians into the view bag, right? So you can see the count is 5, and if you start hovering over, you can see 0 through 4. If you just click on one of them, you can see all that technician information. Okay, so breakpoints working. Create our technician object. I should just step over instead of stepping into. So right now our technician object is basically, it's been initialized, but a bunch of empty fields, right? So it's initialized with empty strings and 0 for the technician ID. If I step over this, my tech ID is null because I have not written a tech ID yet. And so this should be false, right? Tech ID is false. So you could see that if statement is not hit, and it returns to the view an empty technician, right? Which is pretty much what we would expect because we haven't written a technician ID to the session state at this point. That's why I was kind of saying, well, you could skip it because we haven't written anything yet. But now you've seen that. If I hit continue, there we go. Okay, so let's everyone get that coded here. And then we'll write the view for this and get everyone to this point where you got the view loaded up with a drop down of technicians, right? So this is not the list view. This is not the edit view. This is the index view. So what you want to do is go into your views folder and expand. We'll create one called tech incident. So create a subfolder called tech incident. And then create a new view called index. And so the title of this page is called Get Technician. There's a big H1 that says Technician. Here's a form tag that when we post, it'll go to the list action of the tech incident controller So here's the post of here's the post of the list action inside the tech incident controller. So that's where we're going. We haven't really written this code yet. And here's our drop down. We got that helper tag, the select ASP4, the technician ID, which, because this is a strongly typed model, that kind of, you get some IntelliSense there when you're filling that out. This is a bootstrap class. It formats it to look this way. And this new select list, I think this was like chapter 5, just another syntax. Basically says go into the technicians, which remember we returned a list of technicians. Set all of the values to be their technician ID. And the third argument here is, I'm trying to remember the name. That's the display field. Like what you're displaying the name property of the technicians. That's what that is. Now, if I go to a technician, if I just kind of jump back into the technician, we have a name property right here. So that's what that's matching up. This is saying display the name property of the technician model. The first option value is 0. Then we have a submit button that allows, well, it basically says select with a bootstrap class of button primary. So step 1, create your view model. Step 2, create your controller with an index method with a get. And then step 3, make your view with your drop-down list full of technicians. You have any?
Under the homepage where we're actually linking to the tech incident,
yes.
should we be, for the ASP4, should we be doing that to the index or the list?
So here's, good question. So to actually make the link, right, here's your anchor tag, ASP controller, tech incident, ASP action, index.
Okay, because everything else is list, so I just making sure we're following a different pattern here.
Right.
We get to the list after
We
click
get,
on it.
that's right.
Yeah. So index takes you to the page where it's like, hey, you need to select a technician to edit this first.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Use session.
Yeah, good point. Okay, so so in order to work with session variables, there's basically a couple of method calls that you need to put in your program.cs. And so if I open program.cs here, I'm looking at builder services, add session, and then use session on line 34. Now I got some additional things in here, but those are the 3 things that you need to call. Now, backing up here, yeah, that's all you need for right now. Okay, so we got everyone kind of caught up in the class here. Again, this is the home page where you're gonna just click on update incident. You click update incident. This brings you to the drop down list. Where we left off is, hey, when you click on this submit button, it should take us to a list action that is a post. So that's actually where we need to go next. And do a little bit of data validation. Here, if the technician ID that's coming across is 0 when you go to post, well, what is that?
That's the default.
That's the default option, right?
Yeah.
So if the user tries to post the default selected technician, this is where our data validation comes in. Here I load up a temp data key of message that says you must select a technician and redirect to the index, which is right here. But once you set the temp data on message, you now have a message property of temp data. So of course that should be, and I see your hand, Vinny, but let me show you where that pops up in our views. So here's on our views. Let's go to shared. Here's layout. Inside of my layout, if I kind of scroll down, I've got my header. Of course, my header has my nav in it. Underneath that, I've got my container. Inside of container, I've got a main. And here I say, hey, if there is a temp data key of message, then display that in an H2 as such. Is that essentially where you were going with your question, Vinny?
No, my question was actually kind of unrelated, but still related, which was, we're checking if the technician ID is 0, and if it is, we're just saying that they have to select a technician. But aren't we also using 0 as a way to create a new technician? Like, if the ID is 0, that's our default ID for.
Well, we're not doing that here, right?
So it's not going to clash.
No. Shouldn't clash.
Gotcha.
Now this else, so again, you can think of this if else as here, this is, they didn't select a technician. Otherwise, they did select a technician, right? So if they do select a technician, then the technician ID should be coming in to this technician object. So we pass in a single technician. Let's save that to a session variable. And redirect to a list that accepts an ID. So that's kind of where, if I go back to these requirements, that's where we're getting to the point where we're generating the list and the technician ID in the URL. So when you click on select /list/ID, now this is a get, right? So we're going to the list. It's not a post. We just came from a post. And we redirect to a get. PRG pattern, right? Post, redirect to a get. So here we're redirecting to a get. And we're sending in the ID, which that's going to be the example of 14 or whatever. I guess we can just take another breakpoint to demonstrate this post list Click that. Hopefully I removed my breakpoint. I did. Gunter. Click select. So my technician's coming in. Really the only thing that's coming in is 14. And why is 14 coming in? Well, it kind of comes back from back here. This is a select for the technician ID. So that's really the only piece of data that when you post, that's the only piece of data that's coming in. Is that technician ID. So it's kind of an empty technician, just we have the ID. Of course, that is false. Let's go ahead and save to the session variable with the key of tech ID, the value of 14. It's just an integer, so set in 32 and redirect you to a list technician ID of 14. So that'll cause this particular method to fire. And because we're not stepping through that, but if I take the breakpoint out of here, put it in here, now we could step through this one. Just to show you that's where we're going. Right, so this is a list method with a single ID coming in, that's 14. And then we'll start coding that out. So let's kind of finish up this list. It's basically bad data, good data, save the session variable, redirect to a new method. Okay, so once we get back to this get request, that's a get with a list and you're sending in an ID from the drop-down list, ultimately that's where the ID is coming from. We ping the database to get the full technician object, right? So instead of just having a technician ID, we'll have a full technician object stored in technician. A little bit more data validation. I don't know that this is ever quite necessary because that should be hit like back here. But nonetheless, if an ID comes in that the database request doesn't find one, then we'll get some validation here. I guess what the user could do is they could manually plug in a different number in the URL, right? And just plug in the number 15. And then that would cause the database lookup to not be found, thus causing that need for that validation, right? It's kind of the idea behind that one. Otherwise, queue up a new object, tech incident model, where the technician is the technician, and the incidents, again, here's a database lookup. The incidents, again, plural, well, we had a tech incident model, so a technician has incidents. So let's run a database query. The incidents, including the customer that opened it, including the product that it deals with, Here's a sort where the technician ID is the ID that was passed into the route. That ID is coming in via the route. Also, where the date closed is equal to null, right? And we saw at the beginning of this video, if you set a date closed, then that would no longer be included in the query. So we do want basically open incidents. Convert that to a list and return that to the view. So now we get to code the list view under tech incident. So now we're in tech incident list. Okay, and so we'll take a look at this when we come back. But let me, because I know I hopped over that. Leave this here on the screen for a minute. Okay, so a fair amount of typing on the view. Just kind of want to take a step back real quick and realize that what we have coming into the view is a tech incident view model, right? Which is loaded up with the technician object, so a singular technician, and then however many incidents are registered under that technician ID. And so that's coming into the view. So I'll kind of walk over this and then you guys will be able to type it out. We're able to get to the technician name just kind of using this dot notation, right? So we say at model technician name. So the technician object has a name. So that kind of gets that up in the H1. And then if there are incidents, so the incidents has a count. So if I go, it's the incidents is a list of incidents, kind of going back here. If there's more than no incidents, then let's go ahead and render the table. The table has a table heading row, and then for each loop to loop over the incidents and print out each incident information, as well as an edit button. So here's the edit button that'll route you to the edit action of the same controller. We haven't hit that edit action of the same controller, but there is a get and a post that we have yet to code. So going back to list, here's that edit along with passing the incident ID over to the route. So it'll be the tech incident controller, the edit action, and then the ID is going to be up in the route with an edit button. That's a bunch of rows of incidents. If there are any, close the table body, close the table. Here's the else that says no open incidents. So if the count is greater than 0, then display the incidents. Else, the technician has no open incidents. And here's your link to go back to the index method that says switch technicians at the bottom. So if I can get this all on one, let me Windows zoom out on this. Zoom out. Yeah, it's a little tight. I'm not going to do that. I'll kind of hold it here for a little bit and then I'll scroll down a little. Scroll down to the second half of this for you guys to see. Okay, so where we are at now is we should have a list for a particular technician with open incidents. So you should be able to, at this point, go to update incident, select a technician with open. So this gets us to list 14, draw out the table. And actually, if this edit button is wired up, well, we don't have this filled out yet, right? So this is not going to work. So the edit action is not there. But we should get here. So I'm going to do a round and see that everyone can at least get this. Okay, so kind of where we left off is on this edit route, and this is going to be a get. So we need an action on our controller, so it'll be called edit. And what comes into that is an ID. Now let's close that page. So I'm back on the controller, but here we go. So we're passing into edit. Here's our ASP route ID. And so then that'll be up in the route, and then we'll be able to read, because obviously we're going to edit an individual incident. So this ID, and it's easy to get them crossed, should be an incident ID. So again, this little piece of data validation is going to be reading from the session variable. And I already forgot, did we write to that somewhere? Here's our set. Yes, we did. We wrote to the session variable here. And this is reading from our session variable. Little data validation. If the tech ID doesn't have a value, give them an error message and redirect. Otherwise, we read this out of session, because ultimately we're editing an incident. So here we're finding an individual technician. This looks pretty similar to what we had before, right? So a little data validation up front. Otherwise, if the data is good, construct a view model, tech incident view model. This is why we have a singular incident. So here it's not incident's property, but the incident singular property, right? So this is the edit an individual incident. Where basically the technician incident ID is the ID that's passed in, first or default. Then return that view to the model. See if I can fit that all on the screen. And pause. So again, just kind of backing up just a step, here we have a button that calls a method and passes over an ID. Here we write our method, accept the ID, get the technician out of the session, make sure there's a technician, query the database to find the technician, little data validation around that. Assuming there's a good technician, then we load up the individual incident according to its incident ID. We needed the technician because it's a tech incident view model. We got to send that forward to the view and return to view. Now we have not written this edit view. right? So we need to write that, and then there'll be a post, and then we have to write our post. So we are almost there, but we're not there yet. So at this point, we should be able to click edit and get to, well, no, we're not here yet because we have to write our view. This is where we're going. So let's open up the edit view. Under tech incident, you'll probably have to create this. And I'll kind of walk through it verbally and then pause for coding along. Of course, our strict model is the tech incident view model. Here's our HTML title that says edit incident. This at section scripts insert these scripts into the template on this page, right? So in our views, we have a template view, and we don't include these scripts on every page, just on the ones that we need to do some validation. This looks like a jQuery validation plugin to do form validation. This will say edit incident in an H1. Then we have a form that we'll call the post method of the edit action when we're all done with this. And then we start putting things into labels. We put the technician name into a label, customer full name, product name into a label, the title into a label, the date opened into a label. Not until we get a little bit lower do we start making things editable. We put a text area for the description and a input type of text to allow the user to input a string. Of course, there is a date object here that you could maybe get a calendar out of. But keeping it a text allows the user to insert a string. Probably get by with a date. And then they store the incident ID in a hidden field because that's not displayed on the. It's not displayed anywhere, but you need that incident ID to post back to the method, to the edit method. You're not going to be able to edit an incident without its ID. So I'll kind of pause this here. Why don't we just keep it here and get those first so many done. Okay, so now we left off on the customer full name, so we'll scroll down after that a little bit and get the next ones. I'll leave the customer full name div there. And we've got 1, 2, 3 under that. Okay, now after date open div, let's scroll down a little bit more. Again, these next two are text areas and input types of text. So obviously these are what changes can be made. They've got the ASP4 helper attributes. And then, like I mentioned before, we've got a hidden incident ID. Okay, I'm not sure if I put this bottom part on here on the recording. I stepped away. But obviously these are the fields that you can edit. The last 1, 2, 3 divs, you can edit all of these. You need to include the incident ID, sending it back to the server. So put that in the hidden field. You leave this out, it'll should error out if you forget the incident ID. Which now at this point we should be able to go here, go here, and click here. It should hit this information here along with the description and a date closed. We have not coded the save method yet. That's last but not least.
That would be the post for edit, right?
That's right. So I'll pause just another minute here. So one error message that's coming in is around this script section. This is a section called scripts. I didn't show this, but it should be under our shared views, under layout. Well, you might have this, Josh, and maybe yes, maybe not. So here I have at the bottom down here, I have a render section called scripts in false, which means it's not mandatory for the pages to have them. So I'm in my layout CSHTML at the very bottom. Yeah, so what are the two script tags above it? So yeah, included in the, if you're looking at what this is jQuery validation plugin. Yeah. So you need jQuery in order to work with the jQuery validation plugin. Gotcha. So ultimately, if you are going to write some client-side validation with jQuery, then you need all of that. I don't think we do that in this lab, but
I have something different than what you have.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to do a loop and just check on everyone to see if their edit get is working, right? So that's kind of where we're at. We haven't done the post yet, but basically here, this edit action in conjunction with this edit incident view. Okay, so to finish this up, the last piece that we have is to edit. Sending into the edit is an incident view model. Now, if I go back to the edit view, we pass the technician ID up in the route. And here we go. Here's the tech incident view model. So we have a strongly typed model. So when we submit that, that's the type that we're submitting. So we can accept that into this method.
The model never gets tested. It's strongly typed.
So here we can query the incident using a find lookup by the incident ID. We set the incident. Basically, this is our update. These two lines are doing the update. Again, the model incident description and the date closed would be set accordingly. Then we run an update and save changes. Save the tech ID and return to the list with the tech ID provided. So it basically sends you back to the list get, which I think we had this exact same line just right up here, right here, right? So we've written this little logic before. And that should get your edit working. And we have one confirmation that works. That's all it takes.
Is this under Tech Incident Controller?
This is under Tech Incident Controller, yes.
Okay.
All right, I'll stop that recording right there.